This is Trader's Workshop with Adam H. Grimes. Hello, welcome to episode 9 of Trader's Workshop, Market Intuition. I am your host, Adam Grimes. You can find more of my work at adamhgrimes.com, and you should follow me on Twitter at adamhgrimes. So this is a fascinating topic. This is something that I have written about, both in my books. You can find blogs. In fact, if you go to Google and Google Adam Grimes Intuition, that will pull you up to, that'll pull up a whole list of things that I've done, including an old podcast. Now, I wanted to revisit the topic, and my thinking on this has changed just a little bit, but the difference between this podcast and the old one, you don't need to listen to the old one also. This one's going to be much more applied. The last one was a little bit theoretical. I started with a broad funnel where I was looking at different kinds of intuition, even the idea about some intuition that we would call ESP. And that's really something that's so hard to get our hands around. Maybe it exists. It seems to me reasonable that it might. It also seems to me that it has defied many, many efforts over the years to measure in any meaningful way. So at the very least, we can't depend on it. So I don't really think it's worth having much discussion about that. Rather, we should focus on kind of the everyday aspect of trader and market intuition. One interesting thing about this, when I was writing my first book, I was reading a lot of the academic literature. And we're going to talk about a paper that was published in 2010 that speaks directly to this topic. And a good friend of mine, Joe, was one of my early readers for the book, for the drafts. And when we were talking about intuition, he said something that just really recalibrated my perspective. You know, I thought all along, even up to this point after trading for many, many years, I thought of intuition as being something, I knew I had it, and I certainly, I'll tell you some experiences I've had of market intuition. Most are fairly unremarkable, but there were definitely some clear moments of intuition. And I had assumed that it was something that there were traders who had very highly developed intuitions, let's just say that. And what Joe and I came to realize as I was writing the first book was that this is a universal experience. In other words, every trader who trades for any length of time develops market intuition. Now think about that for a moment. What's the takeaway? Every trader has market intuition, and Joe's conclusion, which I think is right, is then it's not an edge, right? If everybody has it, it's probably wrong to think about developing market intuition, at least as an explicit edge. I think and I put myself back years ago when I was trying to figure out all of this market and trader stuff. And there were a few things that I thought were so far beyond my understanding that I hoped to grow into them someday. And when I grew into them, I discovered they weren't quite as intimidating as I thought. So maybe that's a message to you if you're earlier on that path. I know many of you are, and many of you are beyond where I am on the path. And that's kind of the beauty of a format like this. You know, we're touching a lot of different people at different spots. But the two areas where I really thought I was woefully inadequate, one was market intuition, and the other was kind of the polar opposite, true quant work, artificial intelligence, neural nets. And as I learned more about both of these worlds, I discovered that yes, they're real, but they probably don't live up to the hype. And you probably don't need to be scared and intimidated by them, because both of those are in some way kind of a natural extension of things we do anyway. So what is intuition? Well, we probably all have kind of a functioning definition. Intuition to me is a type of knowing that is outside of logical reasoning. So in other words, if I decide if I should go to the grocery store, I can probably lay out a very logical, a very clearly connected steps of reasoning that get me to the conclusion, yes, I will go to the grocery store, I need milk. No, I will not go to the grocery store because it's a thunderstorm. And where I live in the world, you have to walk to the grocery store. So if you can hop in the car, you might have a different decision tree. But that's reasoning, that's logic. And with trading, we correctly focus heavily on logic. And so many of the decisions we make in terms of risk management, even in terms of pattern recognition, are pretty logical. There is, however, sometimes that extra step of intuition. And to me, there have been times, I remember this most clearly when I was a very active intraday trader. And there would be times when I would be watching the market and I would have a sense that something was about to happen, and then it would happen in dramatic fashion. Now, right away, that story I just related to you, and I certainly can point out specifics that to me, to some extent, the specifics are kind of unremarkable, because after you've seen thousands of trades, it really kind of is all just another trade. And I've had this experience swing trading. I had this experience quite frequently on daily charts with market indexes. But if somebody tells you a story like I just told you, you should be suspicious. Of course, you should be suspicious the person is lying, but let's assume that I'm not lying. Let's assume that I'm telling you what I believe to be the complete truth. That I believe I have had these flashes of intuition. Now, if you think carefully, you will realize that I am sensitive, I'm vulnerable to cognitive bias. And that's a whole separate topic. I think that's one of the ways that the dialogue about our thinking and about our developing as people, I almost said traders, but I think as humans, I think over the last decade, this discussion about cognitive bias has really become mainstream. And that's very good. But it seems to me, in talking to a lot of traders, and certainly to seeing much of the discussion, traders haven't fully accepted this, despite the deluge of blog articles on the topic. So what cognitive biases could be working here? Well, one is just kind of a significance bias. You know, if I look at the market, and let's just imagine every day I have an intuition, and most of the time it doesn't really work out. But I'm an S&P trader, and one time I get this gut feeling, and then the market goes down 30 handles that afternoon. What's my takeaway? I'm a genius, right? I'm a genius. I can manipulate time and see around corners, dance between the raindrops, get between the wallpaper and the wall. You know, this is the sort of things traders start to think about themselves. And it is equally possible, in fact, quite likely, that I'm just remembering the big time. I also might be more vulnerable to remembering more recent times. There's a huge recency bias. Something that happened to me last week or last month or this year is probably much more significant in my mind than something that happened 5 years ago. And yeah, that's certainly true. I can remember details of price action from a few weeks ago where I think back to, let's say, the tops in precious metals in 2011. Let's just say it's a little bit fuzzy. If we really thought about it, I could probably have a discussion. But and I do actually remember some intuition around those 2011 highs with precious metals. And we'll talk about where this intuition comes from. The whole point of this is what intuition is, how you can develop your own intuition. So remembering significant events, remembering recent events, and obviously remembering emotional events. Imagine I have that intuition that the market is going to crash intraday. And when day traders talk about crash, you always need to put it in parentheses. It's not or quotes. It's not actually a crash. And let's say I'm long. And let's say the market sells off and I get more stubborn and I buy more and I have a huge loss that day to my account. So I've just had a powerful, painful learning experience, which might have been just as powerful if I'd actually been on the other side of it and made money. But because I have the emotion of seeing my P&L move associated with it, that anchors my perception in a very different way. And that's something, this podcast falls in the series, if you're listening in order. We just did a podcast with Tom and I where we were talking about a new trader needs to experience his or her P&L moving. You can look at charts, you can paper trade, you can study theoretical systems, but once you have actual risk in the market, your cognitive machinery and your emotional machinery are engaged in a completely different way. I know no substitute for that. Now, it's not the only way to learn to trade, but without that, I think you're missing an experience. It's a lot of talking to remind you that you need to be careful when anybody else tells you about their experience of intuition, but you also need to be careful about your own experience of intuition. So what I would suggest you do is journal this. Anytime you have a sense of intuition, depending on your time frame, write it down immediately. What is immediately? If you're a day trader and you have a journal, flip to the back of your book and just make notations within 5 minutes. If you look at a chart and you have a gut feel that you think something is going to happen, note it down. If you're a swing trader and you trade on daily bars and you do your work maybe mostly on weekends, maybe you need to write your intuition down. And it won't be every week, but maybe it's a once a week thing. Maybe it'll hit you. I've had some intuition like hit me in the middle of the night. I'll wake up and have a gut feeling about something. Write it down so that then you can track the outcomes. And if this idea of developing intuition is important to you, then this is something that you probably want to be a little bit obsessive about. It does not take long. I'm not talking about writing multiple paragraphs about how you feel. I'm talking about having a page in your journal that is for those flashes of intuition, that reasoning, maybe inductive reasoning, that is another way of knowing that goes beyond logic, or maybe not beyond, maybe it's just outside of logic. When you have those senses, write them down. And then, of course, you need to revisit those and see what the outcome is, so you'll have some idea about your hit rate with that. Why is that important? Why is that important? Because just like everything else, we need to know how good we really are. And what if you have these very, very powerful intuitions and you track them and you discover you're about 50-50? What's that tell you? That tells you that maybe that sense of intuition is not something you can rely on. And of course, there's magnitude. We could be wrong. We could be wrong 8 times, and then the 2 times the market makes a really big move. It's just like a trading system. You need to figure out how to evaluate that. If you are a systematic trader and a system developer, I'm talking about all of this discretionary stuff, and you're probably thinking, you guys are so touchy-feely, like, do you want to have a group hug or something? And you're thinking that in your world, you just develop systems and it's all algorithms and rules and quantitative measures, right? Well, you're wrong. You are wrong, because some of the most powerful flashes of intuition I have had have been in system development. And it's a matter of putting yourself in the data and seeing patterns and processing patterns. And some of the tools and pattern tests that I come up with, I've woken up in the middle of the night and they've been sort of fully formed in my head, pretty close. And I have to get up and write them down because I will forget by the morning. So it's not just simply a matter of looking at a chart and saying, gosh, I think that's really about ready to go. It also can be, I've been working on this program. I'm testing these different variations of this system, which of course you need to be careful about, but that's a whole separate discussion. And what if we did it this way? What if I'm missing this? What if we turn this upside down? What if I remove this, and this because it's obvious garbage and I'm just left with this? Those are the kinds of flashes of intuition that I almost think you need as a system developer. Can you get there without it? Probably so. I'm going to say something that's going to anger a lot of my readers. If you come from an engineering background, prepare to be angered. Now, I know many engineers who are good traders, but I also think that as a group, some of the people who I have seen struggle most consistently with learning to trade are engineers. Why? I think with the discipline, there is a confidence, choosing my words carefully, there's a confidence, sometimes bordering on arrogance, that we know how the world works, that we should be able to reduce things to a fairly simple set of steps, and then, they're sometimes not so simple. And because the market is sometimes counterintuitive, people with that perspective, and that perspective has served them very well, and other careers find that perspective very challenged in the market. So some of the engineers that I have seen struggle in the market, and I'm not saying that, clearly, I'm not saying that engineers can't trade. I'm not even saying if you're an engineer, you're going to have a hard time learning to trade. But many of the engineers who I have seen struggle when they have opened themselves to intuition and to kind of thinking around the corners, they've had amazing leaps of progress. So keep that in mind. Back to this idea about intuition being real. And this was something that I wondered for a long time. I wondered, even after I had significant success trading, and I realize now I certainly had experienced intuition, but I wondered if it was something like, was it real? I struggle for any other way to say it. Was it a real experience, or was it just something that people talked about kind of mythically, that it was the Holy Grail and nobody really touched it, or it wasn't real? And that's why finding this 2010 paper, and you can Google it, Exploring the Nature of Trader Intuition. I believe the entire paper is available online. It was, at least at one point. Published January 2010 in the Journal of Finance. So this was, the way the experiment was set up was they got completely, they got a group of people basically to look at market data. And some of the market data was random, and some of it basically, I'm oversimplifying, you should read the paper. Some of it was manipulated. And what they found was that very quickly, even completely inexperienced people were able to pull out the actions of manipulation in price data. In other words, they could sense maybe that somebody was operating in that market, pushing it around. And I'm oversimplifying only a little bit. The actual research protocol was quite interesting. And there have been other significant pieces of research done on the topic. I just think this is a very accessible paper. And this was really what convinced me and convinced Joe that anybody who looks at the market for any length of time whatsoever, you begin to develop this intuition. It is, in fact, a real thing. So how do you develop the intuition? Well, first thing is, you need to be not like I was for so many years, you need to be open to intuition, and you need to accept that intuition is a real and natural thing. There's nothing supernatural about it. It's not a superpower, and it will not be your superpower. That's one of the other takeaways. You're not going to sit in front of the screen for so long with your fingers on your temples, magically soaking in the patterns of the market, staring at the screen for 3 years, and then go forth and never make a losing trade. That's not the way it works. I don't think anybody really functions like that. Rather, what you need to do is to immerse yourself in the data. And that is, in fact, I was joking about staring at the screen, but that is how you will develop the intuition. Whatever your market, whatever your time frame, and you may know the answer to that, you may not know the answer to that. If you don't, then actually, you know what? No matter what, if you think you are destined to trade 5-minute charts the rest of your life, then I still want you looking at some daily and weekly bars. On the other side, if you think you are a long-term trader, I would very much like you to watch some intraday price action. And this could be, if you're in that situation, maybe you find a time when you can take 2 or 3 days off of work and just watch very closely some 3 to 5 minute charts. If you haven't done that before, it'll probably drive you crazy. Now you have to watch with intent. There is, of course, you can look at something, and this is the argument for art appreciation, right? Anybody can listen to a piece of music and you go, oh, it's pretty. Or you look at a sculpture and you say, oh, cool rock. But when you understand something about the piece of art, about the time, about the artist who created it, about other works of art, about what it was derived from, what it was saying, about what was going on in the world at that time, the art gains other layers of meaning. So I would suggest there is a very different way that many of you listen to a piece of music and a professional musician listens to a piece of music. There's a completely different analytical process. And I'm not necessarily saying it's better, because you may have an experience of joy and appreciation that transcends the analytical approach. But when you look at price data, you want to look at it analytically. The best way I can tell you to do that is to imagine you are paper trading it. So however you trade, do you trade breakouts? Do you trade breakouts of previous bars? That's kind of painful, but some people do. Do you look for specific candle patterns? Do you look for specific indicator patterns? Do you have some algorithmic system that runs that will give you trade entries? Whatever the answer is, you use that system when you look at the market. So you're not just looking at price moving, you are at least imagining making decisions. And back to the discussion Tom and I had in the previous episode, you will in fact have another level of experience when you actually are making those decisions and when you actually see your P&L move. So absorb the data, put yourself in the flow of the data, and just be open to the experience. It really is that simple. And we've talked here for 25 minutes or so, 25 minutes or so. One of the little quirks, by the way, of spending time intraday trading, some of you have noticed this, you develop a really quite finely tuned time sense. When you sit there for years and you watch your life tick away in whatever 1, 2, or 5 minute intervals, you do kind of develop this, intuition about time. And it's been 23 minutes, 25 minutes. You have a pretty good sense of that without looking most of the time, not always. So you put yourself in the flow, you're open to the experience. And then the other thing that I would do is do something that is not just passive. And this is why one of the exercises that I recommend, and I get some very interesting feedback. So I tell people to write things down, to write price charts by hand. It's a part of my trading course. And by the way, you can find my trading course at marketlifetrading.com. You should go check that out. Here's a moment for the shameless plug. I have two companies, marketlifetrading.com, talentadvisors.com. Talent Advisors is institutional research and advisory, also priced for the individual trader. So if you swing trade, daily, weekly bars, if you're managing your retirement portfolio, Talent might be something that you should check out. If you are looking for something that's a little bit more explicitly educationally focused, check out marketlifetrading.com. Every day I do a market video, a short update during the week, longer update on the weekend, looking at patterns in stocks and currencies. You also get access to what I think are the best analytics available out there. They're the tools that I've used for years and years. So check both of those out if you have a second. So also at marketlifetrading.com, there is a massive, completely free trading course. And you don't have to pay me a penny if you have spent money on educational stuff, and if you're not thrilled with your results, go check out that course. It really, truly is free, no strings attached. I'm going to send you some emails where you're going through it. But one of the exercises in the trading course is to write down both prices and price charts by hand. I get two very different pieces of feedback. I get feedback from people who say, this is really a dumb exercise. This is why we have computers. This is you being old-fashioned, and there's absolutely no point in doing this. The other piece of feedback I get is from people who say, I've struggled for years. This has been the one exercise that has opened up my scene in a completely different way. And I've heard this literally, the course has been out for years and years, thousands of traders, tens of thousands, over 25,000 traders have been through the course. And I have hundreds of emails on this topic. And over again, people say that the act of writing down price charts, and you can do this a lot of different ways. If you're a day trader, you can do intraday charts. I had this cool chart of the S&P. I thought it was cool. I think other people didn't think it was quite so cool, but it was taped around my office, and I taped other pages on it. When I got to the edge, I had to go up and down and around. You can do half-hour bars, 5-minute bars. If you're a complete nutcase, you can do that. If you're a swing trader, you can do daily bars. And you will find that the act of putting pencil to paper, producing, right? So looking at the screen is you taking information in, but when you have to produce it to put it down on paper, it is a completely different level of learning. And that altogether, you can look at my earlier podcast, and I had a lot of other things. I suggested you meditate. I don't think that's a bad idea. I think as I have worked more and more with meditation in recent years, I've become aware of some limitations, and we'll certainly talk about that. I talked about developing emotional control. I talked about exercises like going through life for a few days and pretending that everything you saw in your universe was a message from the universe. I don't think those are dumb exercises, but I don't think they speak directly to the skills of trading. And I think what I've given you here today very closely matches what has worked for me in developing my trading intuition. It is to some extent just a matter of being exposed to the data enough times. And that is one reason why there's a learning curve. And that learning curve is not weeks. I'm sorry to say it's not even months. It is years. And what you will see, if you've been doing this for 6 months and you think you've learned a lot in 6 months, I think you're absolutely right. I bet you have. And I would also bet that what you will know 2 years down the road is completely beyond what you know now and what you can experience now. Last thing about intuition is this aspect of emotional control. And this was one of the other revelations I had working through the book. How does intuition speak to you? Think about that. So I spoke about some of the experiences I had had where I woke up at night or I just kind of knew something. But I think what I probably should have emphasized a little bit more is when we talk about intuition, we talk about a feeling. And what's the phrase? A gut feeling, a somatic response. We feel it in our body. And you probably experienced this in a not market situation, right? Have you ever had an intuition? I don't know, like you had an interaction with somebody that went very badly and you knew beforehand, whether it's a boss or family member or whatever. If you think about how you felt, maybe your shoulders were tight, maybe you were nauseous, maybe you had a headache. Our bodies speak to us. Let me say this differently. Intuition often speaks to us through the sense and the feeling of our body. If you are an emotional wreck, and if you are a new trader, you will be an emotional wreck. If you are an emotional wreck, I think what happens is that channel of the somatic sense speaking through your body is so clouded with emotional noise that the signal cannot get through it. In other words, your intuition is trying to tell you something, but you're all jumbled. You're so nervous that you can't hear that. Still small voice is one of the phrases people use, right? That quiet voice of intuition that can't speak through your jumble of emotions. So this is why also it just takes a lot of exposure to the data. And as you get that exposure to the data, much of the emotional charge will tend to go away. And that's why you need the learning curve. That's why the learning curve is there. So I hope this was interesting, and I hope that it was not completely against your experience or your thoughts. Many of you certainly have had flashes of market intuition, and I would suggest that it's something that you probably need to be open to. It's something you probably need to track and journal in some way, not obsessively, but faithfully, so that you gain some sense. I gave the negative side of what if your intuition was 50-50. Well, what if you discover your intuition is right 70% of the time? 70. Then you probably need to pay attention to it in a different way, right? And you won't know that because of cognitive bias unless you track it. And then immerse yourself in the data, look at different time frames, and look at producing the data by writing down pen or pencil and paper price charts, or at the very least, lists of prices, lists of daily closing prices for 3 or 4 assets. If you can't do anything else, do that. And that will drive you toward an experience of intuition. So let's wrap up here. Please do go check out my sites, marketlifetrading.com, talentadvisors.com. Wherever you found the podcast, if you could leave me a like or a review, I would certainly appreciate that. If you found it someplace you can subscribe. All of that helps get the message out to other people. And if you know any trading friends, tell them about the podcast. I am also trying to be very responsive to questions. We will have some future episodes on questions, so check out my blog, adamhgrimes.com, and I will tell you how to ask a question on the podcast there. Until next time, thank you very much.